Hello and welcome. In this video, we'll be joining Captain Silas on his adventure. A captivating adventure, a magnificent sea, brave-hearted pirates. It's all in this video. If you love adventure and action stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. If you're ready, let's get started. The gleam of gold still lit the hold of the flagship, yet the three new maps spread across the table carried a weight far greater than any treasure. Captain Silas ran his fingers over the map's weathered parchment. Each one pointed to a different corner of the world, and to a completely different mystery. Lieutenant Miller straightened his battered uniform and sat across from Silas. His 10 soldiers were now working on deck alongside Silas's 3 rogues. They were no longer prisoners and guards, but sailors bound by the same fate. One of these maps leads to the glacial fangs of the north, another to the cursed isles of the west, and the third to an ancient city buried beneath the sands, Miller said, his voice still carrying an officer's discipline. If we're going to continue together, Silas, by not taking the flagship back, I'd become a fugitive myself. There's no turning back. Meanwhile, the 3 rogues were whispering among themselves. Scrawny Barnaby had already fixed his eyes on one of the maps. "Captain," he called out to Silas, "why don't we split up? There are 3 maps, and there are 3 of us. Each of us takes a map and divides Miller's men between us." Rough Jack slammed his axe down onto the table. "Don't be an idiot, Ned. We barely have enough hands to keep this ship running as it is. If we split up, the sea will chew us alive." As the argument raged on, a shout came from the lookout tower. "Black sails on the horizon! 5 ships!" Silas raised his spyglass and froze. These were no ordinary pirates. They were the Empire's elite shadow fleet, sent in pursuit of the stolen flagship. Miller's former commander was coming to reclaim both his ship and his honor. Silas turned to Miller. "Looks like we've lost the luxury of choosing our map, Miller. Either we run the flagship through that fog-choked strait and hide among the cursed isles of the west, or we surrender here and hang." In the flagship's spacious captain's cabin, Alistair leaned over the table, studying the 3 maps as if they were chessboards. With Silas at the helm, the task of strategy, as always, fell to Alistair, the mind of the group. "Miller," Alistair said calmly, "your old friends are about to close in. Against 5 ships, this massive flagship doesn't stand a chance on the open sea. Our bulk will be our downfall." Jack laughed loudly as he scraped rust from his armor. "Let them come. If Miller's men load their rifles, I'll smash every head that comes near this hull." In the corner of the cabin, Barnaby spun a gold coin he had taken from the treasure chest between his fingers. His cunning eyes darted from the maps to the approaching ships. "Jack, your muscles won't stop cannonballs, my friend. Alistair, which of those maps leads us into the darkest, shallowest waters? Because those big warships can't follow us there." Captain Silas strode inside and pointed to one of the maps, the Cursed Isles. "We're going there," Silas said. "Miller, have your men throw anything unnecessary overboard to lighten the ship. If we can make it through those rocks, the Shadow Fleet won't be able to follow." Lieutenant Miller hesitated for a moment. Fighting his own navy weighed heavily on him, but he was a fugitive now. "My men are with you, Silas. But remember this, no one who has gone to those islands has ever come back." At that instant, the first cannon fired. The Shadow Fleet was within range. A massive column of water erupted from the sea and slammed into the hull, shaking the ship from end to end. Alistair quickly rolled up the maps and pressed them against his chest. "Barnaby, get the smoke charges ready. Jack, take command of the soldiers. Coordinate with Miller. Silas, you've got the helm." The Silver Gull, chased by 5 towering hunters, surged forward at full speed toward the ominous islands disappearing into the fog. Each cannonball that struck the sea sent violent shudders through the ship, the wooden hull groaning and screaming. Miller's 10 soldiers trembled as they gripped their rifles. For them, this was more than a battle. They were fighting their former comrades, their own flag, and they knew exactly what awaited them if they were captured: execution for treason. A young soldier, Private Pips, dropped his rifle and fell to his knees. "They'll hang us," he muttered. "They'll hang us if we surrender, and they'll hang us if we fight." Miller stepped in front of him and grabbed him hard by the shoulders. He hid his own fear behind a professional mask. "Look at me, son!" he shouted. "If you freeze now, you'll walk to that noose on your own feet. But if this ship makes it through those rocks, you'll wake up a free man. Today we are not soldiers, we are people fighting to survive." Captain Silas roared from the helm without turning back. "No one on my ship is dying today! But the only way that happens is if you stay at those guns. Miller's men, hear me? Fear will kill you, gunpowder will keep you alive." Meanwhile, at the stern, Alistair and Barnaby were working frantically. Barnaby was lashing together old oil barrels and powder kegs into a strange contraption. "Now, Barnaby," Alistair said coolly. With a sly grin, Barnaby lit the fuse, and they dropped their makeshift smoke barrels into the sea. Within seconds, a wall of thick, clinging fog rose behind the ship, not just black powder smoke, but a choking, unnatural mist. The pursuing vessels were forced to slow, struggling not to collide with one another inside the artificial blindness. But the lead enemy ship burst out of the fog and hurled its grappling hooks onto the Silver Gull's hull. Jack hoisted his massive axe onto his shoulder and vaulted to the rail. "Come on then, you pampered palace dogs!" Jack bellowed. Instead of cutting the hooks, he seized the ropes and, in a single brutal motion, flung the first 3 soldiers trying to climb aboard back into the sea. Jack's fearless savagery sent a surge of courage through Miller's trembling men. Private Pips snatched his rifle from the deck and fired his first shot. The Avenger, the fastest ship in the Shadow Fleet, had latched onto the Silver Gull like a shark refusing to release its prey. Behind it, the other 4 ships were already pushing through Barnaby's curtain of fog. Captain Silas gripped the helm so hard his knuckles turned white. His eyes were locked on the narrow, pitch-dark channel between 2 towering rocks ahead. They called it the Devil's Throat. For a flagship to pass through it was the same as suicide. "Miller! Get everyone down to the mid-deck! Jack, don't cut the hooks! Leave them attached!" Silas shouted. Alistair understood the plan instantly. His eyes lit up. "The man's insane," he murmured in awe. "He's using us as bait to smash them into the rocks." Obeying Silas's order, Jack lowered his axe and began hauling the enemy soldiers onto the deck instead of cutting them loose. "Come on! You're all invited!" he roared. The enemy ship, bound by ropes and hooks, was now completely fused to the Silver Gull. Miller herded his fear-shaken men towards Silas. "Hold fast!" Miller yelled. "This will be either our freedom or our grave." As they entered the channel, Silas wrenched the helm hard to port. The Silver Gull slid through the rocks by inches, sparks flying from her hull as stones scraped wood. But the enemy ship lashed tightly to her was not so fortunate. With a thunderous crash, the enemy vessel's starboard side slammed into a massive rock. The sound of splintering timber echoed like a cannon blast. The hooks and lines connecting the 2 ships went taut under the strain. The Silver Gull shuddered as the snapping ropes cracked through the air like whips. The enemy ship remained impaled against the rocks, while the vessels behind it were forced to slow, unable to stop in time. The passage was so narrow that the wrecked ship became an impassable barrier for the rest. When they emerged beyond the fog and rocks into calm waters, only smoke and screams were left behind. Barnaby slumped onto a barrel and took a deep breath. "Captain, after that maneuver the bottom of the ship took a beating, but we're still afloat." Alistair spread the 3 maps across the table once more, pulling them from his coat. "We slipped past the Shadow Fleet," he said. But Miller's men are still white as ghosts. Miller, give your soldiers a drink. Today we didn't just survive, we shattered a legend. Miller stepped closer to Silas and extended his hand. You gave us a chance, Silas. Now, which of these maps do we turn the helm toward? The Glacial Fangs, the Cursed Isles, or the Lost City? For a brief moment, after smashing the Shadow Fleet against that narrow passage and leaving them behind, the crew believed they were safe. But the instant the Silver Gull cleared the strait, the sea went unnaturally still, smooth as spilled oil. The sky bled into a purplish hue, and the wind died completely. What's happening? Miller asked, his hand flying to his sword. The wind's gone, but the ship is still moving. Alistair slammed a hand down on the map. Because we've been caught in a current, he said, his voice trembling. But not one on the surface. This is the pull of the Soul Drinker vortex. Around the ship, massive, half-transparent arms began to rise from the water. They were neither beast nor plant, formed only of mist and sea. Jack swung his axe at one of them, but the blade passed through as if slicing empty air. Cannon fire won't do a damn thing, Barnaby shouted. Captain, these things aren't gnawing at the hull, they're eating into the crew's minds. And indeed, Miller's soldiers began to behave strangely. Some swayed and danced to music no one else could hear. Others climbed the rail, convinced they could see gold glittering on the ocean floor. Fear was giving way to madness. Captain Silas chained himself to the helm. Alistair, find those enchanted words on the map. Barnaby, open the hold and throw the coins from that ancient gold chest into the sea. What? Jack barked. We're throwing away the gold? They don't want gold, Jack, Silas roared. They want a price. And if we don't feed these spirits, we'll become this ship's ghost crew. Alistair began reading the notes, written in an ancient language, hidden in the corner of the map. As his voice rose, the translucent arms tightened their grip around the ship. Miller struggled to restrain his maddened soldiers, all while backing Silas without hesitation. The hull began to crack and groan under supernatural pressure. At that moment, Barnaby dumped an entire chest of cursed coins into the sea. Each piece of gold hissed as it struck the water, like a flame being extinguished, and the massive spectral arms loosened, if only for a heartbeat. Now! Silas shouted. Don't lower the sails, burn them! Following Alistair's plan, Barnaby smeared gunpowder along the edges of the sails and set them alight. The Silver Gull burst free of the dead current, blazing through the darkness like a colossal torch. Captain Silas sagged at the helm, exhaustion crushing him, when a half-ruined stone pier emerged from the mist. It belonged to an abandoned fishing village on the outer rim of the Cursed Isles, a place so forgotten its name didn't even appear on the maps. Bring her alongside, Silas ordered. She's taking on water, we won't hold much longer. Once the ship was secured, Miller counted his men. They had set out with 10. Only 7 remained. As the hard-faced lieutenant stared out at the sea in quiet grief, Jack approached and placed a massive hand on his shoulder. The sea sometimes takes the best of us, soldier, the giant said. The only thing we can do for them now is keep the rest alive. While Alistair assessed the damage to the hull, Barnaby was already borrowing timber and pitch from the old warehouses along the pier. We have to move fast, Alistair said. This harbor may not be as empty as it looks. Silas, the cracks in the hull run deep. Jack and Miller's men, haul the timber. Barnaby, get the pitch ready. We've got 3 days. On the 4th, this ship either floats or rots here. As Barnaby boiled the pitch, he kept glancing into the shadows. Captain, he whispered, there's a strange smell on this island. Feels like someone's watching us, and not even bothering to hide. When the repairs entered their second night, torchlights began to flicker between the ruined buildings of the village. These were neither soldiers nor pirates. but island natives driven mad by the curse, faces scarred and torn. There were more than 50 of them, advancing toward the ship with rusted spears in their hands. Silas drew his sword. "Don't stop the repairs! Miller, defend the pier with your men! Jack, hold the gate! Barnaby, bring anything you've got that explodes!" Clinging to the ship's listing hull, Alistair shouted, "Miller, hold that pier at any cost! If they reach the ship, the repairs are over, and we're trapped here." Lieutenant Miller barked orders to his remaining 7 soldiers. "Reverse the bayonets! Use the rifles like clubs! Don't kill anyone, just knock them off the pier. Their deaths will only bring more of the curse down on us." Jack planted his massive frame at the narrowest point of the pier, standing like a living wall. He used the haft and broad face of his axe rather than the blade. Grabbing the first attacker in his enormous hands, he hoisted him into the air and laughed. "Come on, cool off a bit." With that, he hurled the man into the icy water. Miller's men locked shoulders in disciplined formation, forming a shield wall. They battered aside the natives' rusted spears with rifle stocks, then kicked and punched them off the pier and into the sea. The sharp splashes of bodies hitting the water blended with the shouts and chaos echoing across the dock. Beneath the ship, Barnaby and Alistair stuffed tar-soaked rags into the seams until their hands were slick with blood, then hurriedly hammered planks over them. Above, Captain Silas backed Jack with pistol in hand, firing into the air to intimidate, while never taking his eyes off the horizon. "Last nail!" Alistair shouted. "Silas, cut the lines! Jack, Miller, aboard!" As the final wave of natives surged over the pier, Jack and Miller's soldiers hurled themselves onto the deck. The Silver Gull drifted away from the dock, leaving behind dozens of soaked, furious islanders flailing in the water. Once the ship reached open sea, the wind filled the scorched remnants of the sails. But the vessel was far from sound. Each swell brought a fresh groan from the hull, making every heart leap into the throat. Even rough Jack collapsed onto the deck spent, his hands clasped together. Miller's soldiers bowed their heads, whispering every prayer they knew. Silas gripped the helm with both hands so tightly it seemed as if sheer will alone was keeping the ship afloat. "Please," Barnaby murmured, remembering the gold he had cast into the sea. "Just one more day, just hold together long enough to take us to that great treasure, old girl." Alistair never took his eyes off the map. "If those patches hold," he whispered, "we'll see the great cave at the heart of the Cursed Isles at dawn. Until then, our only hope is the stars above and the spirit of the ship." Captain Silas steered into the cave, into the still, black waters ahead. The cavern opened wide as a vast cathedral, its ceiling hung with crystal formations that scattered eerie violet light from the ship's lantern. "This is as far as she goes," Silas said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. At that very moment, a horrific metallic crack tore up from beneath the ship. The main keel had finally given way. As the vessel slowly settled onto a shallow sandbank inside the cave, the hold flooded completely. Alistair burst forward through waist-deep water, clutching the maps above the surface. "We lost the ship, but we made it just in time. Look!" The crew leapt from the wreckage onto the sand. Before them, at the deepest point of the cavern, rose a colossal hoard from ancient ages. Gold flowed across the cave floor like a river. Emerald-eyed statues stood watch beside swords inlaid with diamonds. And there, above all, the great diamond, the eye of the sea god, fist-sized, exactly as Alistair had described. With a booming laugh, Jack plunged headfirst into the pile of gold. "We're rich!" he roared. "Miller, even your king doesn't own this much gold." Lieutenant Miller stared at his soldiers, frozen in shock. The terror of death that had filled their eyes only moments ago was now being replaced by an uncontrollable hunger. "Don't touch it!" Miller shouted, but even in his own voice, the authority he once commanded was gone. Barnaby pulled a small scale from his pocket and began weighing a coin, but Silas laid a firm hand on his shoulder. Silas's gaze wasn't on the treasure, it was fixed on a strange movement along the cavern ceiling. "Alistair," Silas whispered, "why do you think this treasure has been sitting here for 1,000 years? Where's the way out?" Alistair unfolded the map again. "We found the treasure, Silas, but there's another note here. He who takes shall pay the price, not with wood, but with soul. The ship breaking apart here wasn't an accident. The cave let us in, but I don't know if it intends to let us leave." At that moment, the massive stone blocks at the cave's entrance crashed down into the water with a thunderous roar. Their ship was gone, and every exit had been sealed. All they had left were tons of gold, and the dark. The glitter of the treasure began to spread through the damp air like a poison. Of Miller's 7 remaining soldiers, 3 gripped their rifles, greed fully replacing the fear in their eyes. "There's more than enough gold for all of us," Private Pip shouted, leveling his barrel at Alistair. "Why are we sharing it with these rogues, Lieutenant? Let's leave them here, take the gold, and live like kings." Lieutenant Miller went crimson with rage at the betrayal. "Lower that weapon, soldier! Without these men, you'd have surrendered your soul back in that fog." But the mutineers didn't listen. The first shot rang out, the bullet slamming into a golden statue beside Jack. In an instant, the cave became a battlefield. Jack lunged in a single massive motion, tackling Private Pips to the ground, while Miller and the 4 soldiers who remained loyal surged forward to subdue the traitors. After a short but brutal struggle, all 3 rebels were overpowered. Jack bound their hands and arms tightly with lengths of rope salvaged from the wreck. "The treasure's driven you mad," he growled. "Now sit there and enjoy it, from a distance." Captain Silas exhaled slowly as he looked at the shattered remains of the silver gull. "She's finished," he said. "Strip whatever sound timber and the main mast we can from the wreck. We'll build a raft. We can't carry all this gold, but it'll carry our lives." As the crew prepared to tear planks from the wreck at Silas's command, Alistair had vanished into the shadow of a colossal statue at the very back of the treasure hoard. When he raised his torch to the base of the wall, he felt a faint breeze slipping through the gold, stirring his hair. "Captain? Miller! Over here!" Alistair called. Just behind the mountain of treasure stood an ancient stone staircase, worn by time but still intact, and a narrow tunnel climbing upward toward the island's summit. "We may not need to build a raft after all," Alistair said excitedly. "This tunnel could lead to a hidden cove on the far side of the island. The markings on the map suggest this was an escape route." Silas studied the tunnel, then looked back at his shattered ship. "That passage is narrow, Miller. We can't carry all the gold. We take only what we can carry and climb. But the real question is, what's waiting for us up there? And what do we do with the mutineers once we reach the top?" The narrow tunnel Alistair had found felt like an escape route left behind by an ancient civilization. The crew took only the lightest and most valuable items with them: small statues with emerald eyes, rare gemstones, and the legendary Great Diamond. The rest of the gold was left behind in the dark cavern, along with the broken remains of the silver gull. Captain Silas shoved the 3 bound mutineers to the front. "Move," he ordered coldly. "If there's a trap, let your greedy noses find it first." Lieutenant Miller followed behind with his loyal men. As the tunnel climbed higher, the air grew thick, and the strange carvings along the walls seemed to come alive in the flickering torchlight. Halfway through the passage, one of the mutineers, Private Pips, stepped on a slightly raised stone. In an instant, dozens of rusted arrows shot out from the walls. The mutineers screamed and threw themselves to the ground. The arrows tore at their clothes but missed flesh by inches. They had brushed death itself. Farther on, the ceiling began to collapse. Jack reacted on instinct, grabbing one of the mutineers and yanking him backward just as stone crashed down. The mutineers stared at Silas and the others, trembling. "We're making you walk in front," Silas said coolly. "But we're still saving your lives. Maybe that gold isn't as sweet as you thought." The mutineers lowered their heads in shame. Thanks to the traps, they were beginning to understand that their lives were worth far more than any pile of gold. The tunnel finally opened onto a vast cove hidden within the island's cliffs. When they stepped out, the light blinded them for a moment. Along the shore stood a colossal ancient ship, abandoned mid-construction, its massive frame fashioned from black ebony wood. Alistair studied the ship closely. "It's a legend," he said. "But repairing it would take months. We don't have that kind of time. The Navy will find this place sooner or later." Right beside the massive vessel, pulled up onto the sand, rested a sturdy, wide boat in good condition. Captain Silas glanced at the priceless diamonds and statues packed into his satchel. "Listen up," Silas said to the crew, and to the mutineers who now stood in shame. "We're not wasting time fixing that monster. We take the boat. These small stones we're carrying would buy us 10 luxury flagships in any civilized port. We're no longer fugitives. We're the richest ghosts in the world." Miller cut the mutineers' bindings. "We're giving them one more chance, Silas. If they make another mistake, I'll be the one who throws them into the sea." Together they climbed into the boat and pushed away from the shadow of the colossal island. Behind them, they left a shattered flagship and a cavern filled with gold. Ahead lay a new life, bought with the glitter of diamonds, and a brand new ship. The battered crew, carrying one of the greatest fortunes in the world, eventually reached Golden Bay, the largest trade harbor in the region. Their clothes were torn, their faces burned by the sun, and the strange mix of rogues and former soldiers drew curious stares the moment they stepped onto the docks. Trying to smooth his ragged shirt, Alistair headed toward the shipyard where the most luxurious vessels were sold. Silas and Miller walked beside him. The shipyard's owner, a fat, arrogant merchant, looked at them as if they were beggars. "Gentlemen," the merchant sneered, "that galleon you see there, the Sea Dragon, is worth more than the Empire's treasury. Men as battered and suspicious as you couldn't afford to buy her, you couldn't even afford to step onto her deck. Now move along." Jack surged forward in anger, but Silas stopped him. Drawing attention in public would only summon the Shadow Fleet straight to their heads. They regrouped in a rundown tavern near the docks. Barnaby grinned as he shook a pouch beneath the table. "We've got money, but no one trusts us. What now, Captain? We can't cross an ocean in that boat." Captain Silas drew a rough map in the center of the table. "Here's the plan. We steal the Sea Dragon tonight. Everyone will think we're just pirates. Miller, your men will distract the harbor guards. Alistair and Barnaby handle the mechanisms. Jack, you pull the anchor." Lieutenant Miller frowned deeply. "Stealing again, Silas? I'm a soldier. I don't want to wear the brand of a thief anymore." Silas smiled faintly and reached into his pocket, producing a priceless emerald figurine and a pouch filled with rare diamonds. "That's where the difference lies, Miller. We'll steal the ship, but we'll more than pay for it. Just before we leave, we'll place these diamonds on the merchant's desk along with a note. It will look like theft, but in truth, the price will have been paid in advance. No one will chase us as thieves. They'll just think we were mad buyers." At midnight, a quiet stir spread across the harbor. Moving like shadows, Alistair and Barnaby slipped into the shipyard office. Alistair laid the priceless diamonds on the merchant's desk, leaving a note that read, "The price of the Sea Dragon." At the same moment, Jack and Miller's men silently cut the massive galleon's mooring lines. As the ship drifted away from the dock, Silas took the helm. "Raise the sails," Silas whispered. The Sea Dragon glided out of the harbor like a black shadow beneath the moonlight. When morning came, the merchant would wake to find his ship gone and scream in outrage. But upon seeing the fortune left behind, he would likely give thanks for this theft. As the sun rose over the horizon, the great galleon Sea Dragon reached the safe waters of the open sea. But for Silas, this was more than a change of ships, it was the closing of an era. Captain Silas gathered the entire crew beneath the ship's main mast. Alistair, Jack, Barnaby, Lieutenant Miller, and his 7 soldiers stood there together, exhausted, filthy, their torn clothes still bearing the marks of their former lives. "Listen!" Silas roared. "Those uniforms, those outlaw rags you're wearing, they remind us of nothing but pain, flight, and ambition. Miller, your men are no longer fugitive soldiers. Jack, Alistair, Barnaby, you are no longer mere thieves." Silas shrugged off his old leather coat and cast it into the foaming sea. One by one, the others followed, Miller with his stripped uniform, Jack with his blood-stained vest, the soldiers with the imperial cloth that had once marched them toward death. For a moment, the surface of the sea was littered with the wreckage of the past. Then the waves swallowed it all and dragged it into the depths. Inside the chests taken from the merchant's office were new garments, finely made from the best fabrics, fit for the sea yet bearing a noble cut. As each of them dressed in clean, strong clothing, the air aboard the ship changed instantly. When they looked at one another now, they no longer saw fear, but a shared future. "This ship is no longer called the Sea Dragon," Silas said, striking his wine goblet against the railing. "This ship is our compass, our destiny. From this day on, her name is the Wandering Star." Alistair adjusted the cuffs of his new silk shirt and smiled. "Wandering Star, the light that will guide us home through every darkness." Barnaby whistled cheerfully as he tucked the diamonds into the hidden pockets of his new clothes. Jack fastened a silver-hilted knife to his fresh sash. Lieutenant Miller studied the upright stance of his soldiers, now his comrades, and saluted Silas. This time, the salute was not given to a superior, but to a friend. "Captain," Miller said, "the Wandering Star is ready. The crew is ready. The wind is with us." Silas stepped to the helm, straightened the collar of his new coat, and looked toward the horizon. "Then," he said, "Wandering Star, carry us into a new legend."